Hi, it's Jennifer Evans with Empowering Wellness Counseling Solutions, and we've got an exciting week for you. We are talking all about the bad brain and how our past, and actually how our family's past, even before we were born, we were destined to react in certain ways and have certain behaviors. And so we are getting into what is my book, Saying Goodbye to Bad Brain. We are going through basically everything that is in here and why we act and react the way we do, and why we shouldn't find any shame to our behaviors. It all comes down to the brain is just another organ trying to survive, and so we act and react in very predictable ways. So I'm excited, and of course you can go on Amazon and buy Saying Goodbye to Bad Brain. Thank you so much. Hi, it's Jennifer Evans with Empowering Wellness Counseling Solutions. We have an exciting week for you. Today we are talking about the science of trauma and the relationships we get in because of our trauma brain. So we're starting with understanding what the neuropathways are that influence our relationship choices and the negative cycle that we get into. And you can go back to previous videos that talks about blame it on the brain, our negative cycles, and they will help you. The dynamics that we get into in relationships will help you learn more. But ultimately, the negative cycle is we have a distressing thought, feeling, or belief. It leads to avoidance. We get a short-term gain, dopamine pull, and short-term relief. Long-term anxiety growth, long-term neuroconnections to our trauma and our negative narrative. We get implicit devaluing, low motivation to do better, and low capacity to believe that we can do better or change. And so as we get into finding relationships and how we are attracted to people and how we find connections, when we have chronic stress and trauma both show up as the same on MRI studies. So when we have these chronic stress experiences, which we all had when we lived through COVID, what we find is we find that we build bonds with people that are connected to trauma bonds. So one of the things trauma does is it creates this isolated feeling for ourselves. So we feel a lot of shame and guilt. So we get held into our trauma, and we find the amygdala, that primitive part of our brain, is saying, this is how I find value and meaning. And then we have this sense of, I don't want to say worthlessness, because there's a lot of people who have high self-esteem even though they have trauma, but almost this implicit feeling like there's something missing and different in them. So when they find somebody who has a similar trauma experience, then there's a higher likelihood that they will become bonded and connected, because there's a familiarity there. There's a sense of comfort in knowing that somebody else has been through something similar as you have. There's also this idea of mirroring trauma in our pain, and we find that when we look at wounds need mirrors is really a part of what trauma bonding is. It suggests that people are often drawn to play out in relationships, friendships, and even professional settings some of the unresolved experiences that we've had in our past. And when we get into a little further and we talk about universal constructs, this all will play together on our emotional reactions, our attachment, our trauma and chronic stress, and our perceived realities and expectations, and how they all come together. And as we've said before, when it looks at what is holding us back from success, it's this idea that our past is really occupying our present. And so trauma bonds are really a part of that occupied past. So we're really creating and reinforcing, and the brain is just trying to make sense of our experiences. So it makes a lot of sense that as it's doing that it's trying to, what we call, recapitulate the trauma. It's trying to relive that space, because if we relive that time, then it feels like there's more value for it. But oftentimes we are finding ourselves in chaos because we seek a perceived sense of control. We find ourselves in chaos because we seek a perceived sense of control. And trauma bonds are that chaos for what felt like enlightenment and validation. And so a part of that is mirroring the trauma or pain. So having people with unhealed wounds will seek out unconsciously relationships that replicate the dynamics of those past experiences. We'll also find somebody that wants comfort and familiarity with their trauma. So even if the dynamic is painful, there's a sense of familiarity, there's predictability there and comfort. And so we go to it like a moth towards a flame, we go right towards it. And we find that there's, again, this perceived sense of healing, that if we can be in this mirrored relationship, it gives us a chance to grow and heal and act as an emotional classroom for you to become aware of your own wounds and recognize your patterns and work through them. And so oftentimes, again, it's feeding more of the trauma and making it relevant when really it does not serve us. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to see this for the growth opportunity that it offers us, and also for the time that we are in suffering. And remember, sometimes we think we're in the 100-acre woods, but really there's huffalumps and woozles all around us. So we think we're in a space of gratitude, growth, and strength building, but we're still in a pace of suffering. And so being grounded is really important in these dynamics, so we know how we're using this to serve us and what is not serving us, because an invalidating environment is just around the corner. So just be aware. So when we can develop self-awareness, we can practice our emotional regulation. So we are grounded. We're in a here and now state. We're using that prefrontal cortex for executive decision making. We're finding healthy relationships, understanding our side of the street and what we are doing to foster and focus on our side of the street and not get lost on other sides of the street. We use a sense of mindfulness to be present and have an acceptance of where we're at, interjecting into or neutralizing that cycle. And there will be another video this week up on that. Then we find some healing in these trauma bonds. So it's important for us to understand and go back to, and I'll have a link in the video description, so look at trigger mapping. This is a key place to use this trigger mapping for your emotional regulation. Know what your triggers are. Understand where your trauma bonds are. If you feel like you're in a relationship and you're using the words always and never, the what ifs, the shoulda couldas, then you're probably in a trauma bond. Try to look closely at what is the trauma bond. Acceptance, and then action. How do you mitigate this to be healthy? Are you being implicitly asked to take on a victim, rescuer, or persecutor role, which can happen? And if so, we have the triangulations of trauma and relationships. So go back to that video and take a look at that. And when we can neutralize the cycle, then we're breaking free from these patterns, and we're no longer recapitulating the suffering over and over again with all of our relationships. So find your pattern. If you feel like you're dating the same person over and over again, more than likely you haven't fixed that dynamic and you are stuck in a trauma dynamic. And then what we can do to heal is find our neutral cycle. Go back to the video last week on individuation and emotional regulation. Learn those key ideas and steps to interject into the cycle, to sit with the neutral and take one step for agency. When we are connected to what our values are, then we can take one step every day to live a life that is reflective of those values. And that will create the positive cycling, and it will build and compound so that we can continue to have those healthier relationships and interactions and not get stuck in the toxic. I am Jennifer Evans with Empowering Wellness Counseling Solutions. Thank you so much.